40. 10 years since the fall of Dahlgren.
Sir, my sincere apologies for my lateness,
Androna said, rushing into the room with her assistant carrying a stack full of papers and folders.
No, don't worry about it. We still have plenty of time,
Chesney said, smiling genially at the head of the table.
How's your daughter doing?
Androna, Lily's mother, had always been the clumsy sort in every aspect of her life, other than research, a quality that never ceased to be a source of endearment to him. He was certain that she was arms deep in one investigation or another, when her poor set-upon assistant had no doubt reminded her, again, of her impending meeting with him. He was used to this, and had planned his timeline accordingly. She shared in her daughter's fiery red hair, though unlike most Fiola, she lacked the near-universal forehead plaiting, and instead kept her full head of hair tied back neatly in a ponytail. Endis, her female Doru assistant with long black hair, tripped over her own feet and sent a handful of folders sliding across the table. How these two had managed to find each other was beyond Chesney. In the years after the fall of Zagos, his temple was repurposed several times. Now it functioned as a quasi-city-state, part city, part research hub. As unfair as it was to the continued prosperity and growth of both continents, the fact of the matter was that most of the remaining ancient technology was situated in Sasquatch. While the throne of the Immortals was technically owned in joint between Nasquat's and Sasquatch's governments, Sasquatch was still much more prepared to perform excavations there. Plus, the research labs in Sasquatch were all incredibly difficult to reach. As such, Chesney had made it his personal mission to hire the best and brightest minds Sasquatch had to offer on Nasquat's behalf to help bridge the gap in technological advancement. If the two economies were ever going to join in a permanent fashion, they needed to do so on equal terms. Now this city was called Celtica, based on a loan word from the original Regan which meant something like dawn or beginning, and the three of them met in a conference room in the research lab they'd rented for her research.
Oh, she's brought home another stray. I don't mean a pet this time,
she sighed.
Though the woman has more pets than she knows what to do with, too. I think she's rather cross you got married before she did, to be honest. She was very happy for you both. Don't get me wrong, but I think she was planning to be married off by now. How's your wife, by the way?
Chesney let out a long breath.
Oh, somehow even busier than I am, what with the diplomatic duties and her little side projects. She wanted me to say thank you again for help during her negotiations, by the way. Your insights were invaluable.
By then the assistant had composed all the files back together, so he cleared his throat and began again.
So, why don't you give me an update on what you've been working on?
Androna nodded sharply now that the pleasantries were over and adjusted her glasses.
Yes, sir. We were able to finally get a rope network hub set up next to Durain for easy access to the Lifeform Research Laboratory, which should make our investigations there far more productive and efficient. Oh, and why are you focusing on that front?
He couldn't help but ask. There was no shortage of technologies to research, and he had no doubt she had a good reason for doing so. But he still wanted to hear her reasoning. She fiddled around on the table until she found a folder, and opened it up before him.
After our previous discussion, I took to heart the question of what could benefit Nasquat most in terms of bridging the gap on the economic disparity between the two continents. It struck me that Nasquat's soil is far better at growing food than Sasquatch's. Have a look at these numbers.
She pointed to two graphs, Nasquat's being much larger.
Nasquat's yields are so great they regularly have surpluses, whereas Sasquatch can barely subsist on its own. Thankfully, the fishing industry is recovering enough to fill in the gaps, but these crop yields are, after we've selectively bred the hardiest and most nutritious plants we could. Nasquat has much greater output, and I've been told that these are all native Nasquat species, meaning none of their crops have been engineered at all.
She brought out another folder and revealed some sketches of the inside of the Lifeform Research Lab.
Using some of this technology, I'm absolutely confident we could genetically modify some of these Nasquat plant varieties to produce even greater yield. With this much food, even with Nasquat's new cities and population growth, they would have more than enough to sell. This has a knock-on effect that makes Asquat's food situation far more stable and would de-escalate a lot of the squabbling from the various city-states here.
Chesney raised his eyebrows. He was impressed. It was one thing to have a skilled researcher, but quite another to have one with inventive and practical visions for the future.
That's a fantastic idea, Androna, especially with the recent expansion efforts into western Asquat. I've been told that the wetland soil there can easily be turned into rich arable land. Quite.
She nodded, and he caught the small smile of pride she had for just a moment. It was gone just as quickly, and her no-nonsense face returned to its regular math.
However, there's a hiccup. Let me guess, the surrounding wilderness is proving to be too savage.
She shook her head.
No, actually, we've cleared out the remaining threats there. The real problem is a matter of access. Gabnid must have locked the place down with a number of security protocols that we just can't bypass.
He nodded and tented his fingers in thought. The solution was obvious, but still, he didn't like it. He had wanted Lennis to recover and gain a better understanding of the technology left behind on their own, with as little help from the Rygans as possible. Maybe that was a short-sighted decision that cost them time and resources, but he wanted the people of Lennis to feel real pride in their own civilization before Piazza's new Grand Cirque phase 2 idea got off the ground. Androna knew his feeling on this too, so he knew she wouldn't bring this up if she didn't think she could get around it quickly enough.
All right,
he said, nodding.
I'll get someone from the survey team to come advise you.
After that, he had a thought.
On that note, how are the Nails units and other admin automatons treating your staff?
She scoffed.
Oh, very polite, when they acknowledge our existence.
Endis raised her hand.
Actually, one of them even called me by name. Well, after I reminded it for the 5th time.
He sighed. He couldn't exactly be mad at them for following their own programming, but despite how utterly invaluable they were as research assistants and protectors, there was a definite extra layer of difficulty added by their attitude towards non-Regans.
Let me know if they get worse. I'll give them more specific instructions to be less racist.
He checked his watch.
Do you have any other updates?
Androna raised her eyebrows.
Oh, did you need to go, sir? Soon,
he said.
I have a speech to give in about 20 minutes. Ah, that would explain your formal robes.
He chuckled and looked himself over. He was wearing his finest red silk fold-over robe. It was all form-fitting and trimmed with an ornate black and yellow design around the edges. He liked to think he looked rather dashing in it.
What? You didn't think I dressed up for you?
She raised an eyebrow.
Considering last time you showed up in your bedclothes, no, that thought had not entered my mind.
He barked at a laugh and scratched the back of his head self-consciously.
Ha, got me there. All right, fill me in on the rest before I have to go. And so it is with great honor. I present to you all the first graduating class of the new Grand Cirque Magic School.
He called out, gesturing to the beaming students standing behind him, dressed all in black robes with blue trim, as was tradition for graduates to wear, along with tri-corner hats. All the parents and families of the children in the seats below stood and applauded. He couldn't help but turn and applaud them as well. He looked over each of their nervous, beaming faces. Over the years he'd gotten to know all of them so well. Knowing that they'd be gone was strangely painful to his heart. He hadn't expected that pang of loss. It had taken him a long time to feel up to returning to the magic school, this time as a teacher. Obviously it was strange, being barely older than the students themselves, but more than that, he'd always had conflicting feelings about this place, even after the reconstruction. And it was still almost too painful to contemplate the solemn statue meant to commemorate the loss of life at the previous school. But here he was, sending off the first new batch of students graduating. It was something he'd never gotten to do. He hoped it meant the world to his students. It meant the world to him, to be able to give them the chance. Headmaster Dakin joined him at the podium, quickly finished off the ceremony, and they walked off together.
Look at how far we've come,
the old man couldn't help but say, looking over the new school with such pride.
In just a few years we've transformed Asquat. made a brand new city, a brand new hope. It's amazing how everyone has come together to make this all happen. Haha, amazing nothing. It was a lot of damned work. But yes, I can't believe it's going so well. And thank you for keeping the position open for me for so long. I should have joined you much sooner. Oh, pish posh, Chadsney. Nobody thinks badly of you for finding it hard to return to your life.
Still, it made him squirm, being seen, being looked up to. Truthfully, in the years since his journey, he jumped from task to task, project to project, never settling down one. Never stopping. He forgot how. He didn't know what to do with himself. And then one day he just ran out of things that needed him. And he couldn't take it. It had taken Medea and his mother and about a dozen other of his friends to bring him back from the depression and indecision that followed. He couldn't lead a quiet life. He couldn't lead a public life. His body and mind craved adrenaline, and without it, he was rudderless. Which was when Dakin had come to see him and offered him this teaching position. At everyone's encouragement, he'd taken it. It was hard at first. He felt so out of place. But the earnest faces of the children, the sincere desire to learn and understand their gifts, it had given him something he had missed: helping others. By focusing on other people, it gave him time to come to terms with himself too. And after that, everything had begun to fall into place. After that, they were finally married, at 19. He had wanted to marry her sooner, but it had never felt like the right time, like he would be using her as a crutch, and not as an equal partner. Once he had found this new passion and this new sense of self, he finally felt that he could return her enduring love for him as she truly deserved. And seeing her in that beautiful dress on that day had made all the waiting worth it.
Still, I don't know if I ever properly thanked you for that. I didn't really understand it at the time, but it was exactly the right move for me. You know, when I first began, it was so nerve-wracking seeing all their faces looking at me so expectantly. But now I look forward to it every day.
He looked back at the celebration.
I am really going to miss them all terribly.
Dakin put a hand on his shoulder.
Yes. We put so much of ourselves into teaching. Most people don't realize just how much. And then, when they go off to their lives, they leave that little hole in our hearts. It never gets easy. But it gets bearable.
Chesney reached up his hand to touch the headmaster's.
Thanks.
Then they kept walking. Then he had a thought.
You know, I don't know what it is, but I feel like the children that come to this school are way more powerful than when I was a student. I think there's one little girl in particular who just arrived for the next semester who's going to be a real handful.
Stroking his beard knowingly, Dakin grumbled.
Yes, I think I know exactly who you mean. That little Joyness, right? Yes, I made sure she landed in your class.
The old man laughed. His candor made Chesney laugh.
Of course you did. Well, actually, I appreciate it. I really want to see how strong she can become.
Without really meaning to, they stopped in front of the memorial. His eyes looked over each of the neutral forms that made up the crowded statue. Though none were carved in any particular likeness, every time he looked at it, he felt like he could see another familiar face. But today he also felt peace. Below it was a plaque made of the same amazingly resilient metal as many Regan ruins, and on it was the name of every single child and teacher that had fallen here on that fateful day. He wanted to make sure that none of their names would ever be forgotten. He really should get going. The show would be soon, and no doubt Medea was waiting for him at home. He hesitated, then turned on his heels.
I think I'll go and say goodbye to each of them before they leave,
he said finally, and left the headmaster to go and bid one final farewell to his precious students. Dakin smiled and watched him go, knowing the feeling all too well.
Oh, there you are,
his wife called out as he opened the door to their home.
What kept you? Did the ceremony run long?
They had settled down in a glamorously large home they'd had built just south of Dasdown Island. The location was remote enough that only the most dedicated and fearless solicitors came asking for them at home, instead of their much more public and accessible office, which gave them all the privacy they ever wanted. Medea was standing in front of the tall mirror in the hall, turning this way and that as she adjusted her silken green dress and assessed her makeup.
"Yeah, sorry. That's my fault,"
he said, groaning as he plopped his bags down and rolled his shoulders.
"Did you already eat?" "No, I was waiting for you,"
she said, then turned from the mirror and walked over to him. Her heels clacked over the tile as she sauntered over to him and pressed her lips to his. Then she stood back and asked,
"So what do you think of this one?"
He was running out of ways to tell the woman she was drop-dead gorgeous to him. The green dress was very elegant. Backless, shoulderless, with the dress front being kept up by attaching to a silky collar around her neck. Her left thigh was also exposed by a long slit up the side.
"I'm not sure who you're going to distract more with that dress, the actors or the rest of the audience."
She giggled in a low voice.
Right answer? I've had a rough week, so I'm looking forward to letting loose tonight. And you?"
She began to whisper.
"Should get out of those snooty clothes and get into something fun too."
Well, he couldn't argue with that. It took him a second to remember what words were again.
Why don't you help me pick out something?"
That also seemed to be the right thing to say because she said,
"I picked out just the thing. Come here."
She led him back to their room and spent a few minutes dressing him up like her doll. Black suit jacket, deep red silky dress shirt. Rather than give him a tie, she unbuttoned a few of the top buttons and purred.
"There, much better. Okay, now No, we will be a distraction." "Oh, hush. Let me have my fun. I want us to look absolutely fabulous for the first night."
Aside from her job as diplomat, Medea had several artistic side projects she had been working on, and finally, this one had come to fruition. In the years after their adventure, she'd spent some time working on her singing talent. While not much ended up coming about from it, she discovered that her real passion was writing songs and plays. She found that her ideas always lacked a bit of polish, though, so she ended up collaborating with the famous playwright Charlotte, whom she had already established a relationship with by funding some of her productions. Tonight, finally, was the culmination of years of work. A play, a musical, based on their adventure. Inwardly, he wasn't a fan of being the center of that much attention, but there was no way he was going to say anything to ruin his wife's jubilant mood. He'd long ago got used to being a public figure. Still, he'd grown like a baby.
Ugh, don't they usually wait for people to be dead first before they make plays about them?
She smirked.
Well, considering we are immortal, I think that would be quite the wait. Exactly my point. See, you agree. Sue, why don't we stay in tonight?
She chuckled.
Oh, you'd like that, wouldn't you?
She ignored his pretend grousing and spun in excitement.
Ooh, I can't wait to see it. I deliberately stayed out of dress rehearsals and set design. I just worked on the broad strokes for this one. I want to be surprised. So come on, let's go get some food already or we're going to be late. Okay, but I get to pick where we go. Plus, we need to take the ship instead of just warp there,
he said, doing the final adjustments to his hair. That got a confused noise from her.
Wait, the ship? Why? We're already running behind.
He winced. He hadn't planned this well.
Right. Sorry. I have something to talk to you about after, and I'll need the ship to do it. Plus, I absolutely love making an entrance with it. It's been ages.
She laughed, and it was like the melodious tinkling of bells.
Men and their toys.
She scoffed, but then hooked her arm into his.
Well, go on, Mr. Hero. I have something to talk to you about after the show, too.
He had a sneaking suspicion he knew what that was, and he already felt a preemptive pang of guilt about it. But that was a problem for later.
All right, my love, let us go. I want to try out that place that popped up in Grant Cirque on the way to Jurain. Ooh, the one that sounds like those boxed lunches we got in the past? I've been dying to try that. Yes, let's do that.
A few supersonic jet trips later, the pair arrived on the outskirts of Jurain and into the recently remodeled Nebula Theater. It was the veritable pulse of culture on Lennis, and after a new rope network hub was set up to connect the city to the throne of the immortals, people from all over the world flocked there to experience the newest shows, to say nothing of the fashion and art industries that had sprung up. It went without saying, but Charlotte's new show, Spirit of Justice, was hotly anticipated even by many of Sasquatch, who understandably had a slightly less favorable take on Chesney in particular. The events at the Helm, Temple, Conchudo, and Roki had somehow been laid squarely at his feet, which was why Medea had been the more successful diplomat, a task Chesney was more than fine to leave in her care. Change was coming, he knew, but it would take time for the most stubborn hatreds to pass on into memory. And so, while this particular show was booked solid for literally months, they of course had the best seats in the house, and for free at that. As a favor to Charlotte, they had agreed to a live interview with the winning bidder from the press in the lobby, prior to the show, which apparently was going to be reprinted in tomorrow's paper, along with a full-page review promised by Nordis, a well-respected art critic. The interview was full of softball questions, and the interviewer took special attention to compliment Medea's dress. Chesney was sure that with the recent invention of photography, the photo of them both accompanying the interview would sell a lot of papers. Eventually, a real question landed on him.
So, Chesney, what are you hoping to see in tonight's performance?
This was an easy one.
Honestly, I want to see something fun. If anyone wants an accurate account of the story, they should read Luliette's book. I'm hoping this show is entertaining and memorable, rather than being too stuffy and accurate.
He saw and took the opportunity to win a few points with the crowd. He turned to them.
Am I right? Who's ready to have some fun tonight?
They all cheered along with him. While he knew the Doru always had his back in Sasquatch, he was happy to see a few Fi Orla supporters among them as well. The interviewer had another question queued up.
Have you ever considered a return to mercenary work?
That was a surprise. While it was true he had offered his services a few times while he was still finding his way in life, the truth was he had more money than he'd ever need, and had finally settled in for a somewhat quieter pace in life.
Well, that's quite the question. I can't say I'll never do it again, but I'm quite pleased with the life I've carved out for myself. I'd be lying if I said I didn't miss the excitement sometimes, but...
He looked over to Medea and took her hand.
I feel like life is plenty exciting just as it is right now.
Medea smiled coyly, and a lot of the girls in the crowd giggled. The interviewer then looked to Medea.
I've always wanted to ask, Miss Medea, do you ever miss the singing aspect of your career?
She made a show of pondering this question before answering.
Well, I definitely did enjoy it. I still practice, actually, but I found that when it became a job, it wasn't nearly as fun. It's a part of myself I absolutely cherish, but as for when I share it, I found that it was something I most wanted to do to show the people I care about how I feel.
She couldn't help but blush a little, and she self-consciously tried to hide her smile with her hand.
One last question before I let you go. Are the rumors of a secret colony of Regans being slowly brought to Lennis true?
That seemed to catch the attention of the crowd, which hushed suddenly to catch the answer. She sighed exasperatedly, and glared at the interview without fear of her true feelings being self-evident.
No, absolutely not. As I've made perfectly clear to everyone who will listen, when the time is right, the question of when, where, and how many will be brought to all the relevant leaders of Lennis. Not before. They've waited for tens of thousands of years. They can wait a few decades more.
She stood and took Chesney's arm, putting an abrupt ending to the interview. They left the cordoned-off area of the lobby, and walked into the theater, smiling demurely to the crowd that parted for them. Once they were out of sight for a moment, she growled,
The nerve. I hope he enjoyed that, because that's the last interview he's getting from us. What kind of tabloid gumbo shit is that? Well, judging by the reaction of the crowd, it looks like it was something everyone is at least a little concerned about,
he said diplomatically. Ignoring him completely, she continued to grumble.
That jerk is lucky I didn't zap him. It annoys me so much. We put in all this work for everyone, and they still have the nerve to treat us like Like we could turn on them any second. Yeah, I get you. They treat us like we're not even real people, just concepts they can say things about, put us on pedestals, and then try to knock us down. Exactly. Ugh, whatever, I don't want to think about that ass anymore.
They sat down in their seats and ordered a drink from the balcony attendant. Soon, the tension in their bodies began to dissipate, and a new kind of tension replaced it as the audience filed in, and the time of the show's debut approached.
Ugh, I'm so nervous,
she whined, fanning herself with her hand.
What if this is just a complete disaster? Should I have taken a more thorough look at everything before? Come on, relax,
he soothed, rubbing her back.
Charlotte hasn't let you down before, has she? Well, no, not since I've worked with her. Though apparently her second musical she directed after she started out was a complete wreck.
That he hadn't known. Well, nothing to do about it now.
Well, even if it is awful, we'll get through it the same way we get through everything. Yep. Putting on a big smile while we scream inside our heads,
she said, nodding conspiratorially.
Just like old times.
The lights dimmed, the curtain rose. The play began. A complete accounting of the play would be far too verbose to describe here, so instead, please enjoy a collection of Chesney and May's comments to each other as the musical proceeded.
Look at the size of that guy. He could bench press an actual bench with people on it. That was not me at 13. Right? My character looks like a toddler in comparison. A very sexy toddler, for some reason. That feels wrong on so many levels. Okay, again with the tears. I did not cry this much. Are you absolutely sure about that? I will send you to your mother in a bag. Chesney. A very small bag. Okay, and now what is this? How is Zagos this handsome? And why did he get the most fun musical number in the whole play? Yeah, it's going to be in my head for the rest of the week. That's going to mess me up for a while. Huh. Somehow I forgot the girl fight between you and Wild for my love. I feel like I would have remembered that. And apparently my character is so stupid he can't literally see you two stealing pieces of the Sophie costume back and forth as you both try to sing your love to me. The really sad part, I actually really like how the song switches instruments so dynamically. I can't even be mad at Charlotte, this is good work. Wow, Chesney, why didn't you tell me that Lily basically molested you when you two first talked? Oh please, I didn't even say anything when Tiger and Spade's characters were merged together, and I dueled him to stop the marriage. While I will give them credit, they went really over the top for these blood effects. It's so realistic. Look how more and more blood comes pumping out when Lokiarn stabs me repeatedly. I will bet you anything they don't actually clean it up properly during the intermission, and someone slips on it.
Intermission?
Oh, waiter? 2 more glasses of wine, please. Full ones. Wait for it. Wait for it. He's backing up. He doesn't see it. Come on, notice it.
The audience gasps as the actor playing Mouse slipped in the fake blood.
Damn it. Okay, wait. So are we robots built by Gabnid to think we are Lanusians? Or are we monsters created from a bunch of dead Ragan bodies? No, wait. I think we are actually de-aged clones of Sophie and Cormu. No, wait. Wasn't that the plot point where Cormu and Sophie were actually clones of themselves, and it was the copies that died? Well, either way, I'm impressed they managed to cram all this into a song. He gets another song. What the hell? Ooh, and they gave it a key change in the middle. And did you notice how there's a leitmotif of our song hidden in the background? Stop being impressed.
At long last, the universe took mercy upon them, and the musical was complete. Chesney had gotten his wish. It had not been accurate, and it was fun.
Well, that was an experience,
he said breathlessly.
Can't wait for Mom to see that one, and then ask me a lot of very amusing questions after, like I haven't explained the entire adventure properly this whole time. Well, I can certainly say if things had gone that way during our journey, it would have been a lot more fun,
Medea added, smirking and giving him a raised eyebrow. They, as well as the rest of the crowd, all stood and applauded as the cast came out once more and bowed, and all the usual fanfare as each cast member bowed on their own with more applause. And then, of course, Charlotte came out on stage, and it all began again. She was a beautiful sane woman in her late 30s, with short, spiky, seafoam green hair and a coral pink dress. She smiled tearfully at the warm reception, and the flowers and the true appreciation in her actors' faces. She tried to speak, and when the crowd quieted, she said,
"Thank you so much, everyone. The list of all the people who have made this possible is far too long to say. Every actor, stagehand, set designer, costume designer, writer, producer, and my wonderful backers. This production is a result of all of your hard work."
She bowed very low, both to her own actors and the crowd, before raising a hand to address the audience.
"Now please stay in your seats, everyone. As a special treat for our opening night, we have a special performance. Just give us a moment to set up."
Giddily, she trotted off stage, and she was joined by the actors, and the curtain fell, as the audience murmured in anticipation. Chesney looked over to his wife.
"Oh, what's this? I won't spoil the surprise. Hold on, though. I promised Charlotte I'd help with something backstage,"
she said as she got off her seat.
"You stay here, I'll be back right away."
He raised a curious eyebrow, but said nothing else as he watched her softly apologize to everyone she passed. What could Charlotte possibly need her for? The minutes passed on, and he could hear things being moved behind the curtain, the orchestra rearranging themselves. And soon the lights dimmed again, and a spotlight appeared on the stage, cutting darkness in half. He looked around the darkened theater self-consciously, wondering what could possibly be keeping Medea. Charlotte appeared and walked to the middle of the stage.
"Thank you for your patience, everyone. Now, I'd like to introduce someone who's very special and an inspiration to me. I begged and begged her, and she was exceptionally kind enough to finally agree. And so it is with the utmost love and gratitude that I give you Medea."
The audience erupted into shocked gasps, Chesney among them, as Medea walked out behind the curtain behind Charlotte, and the spotlight stayed on her. She smiled cheekily to the crowd, and even managed to spare a wink for Chesney sitting up in their seats. He had absolutely no clue about this. His heart couldn't help but hammer in his chest from the sheer nervous anticipation.
"Hello, everyone. When I was a little girl, I absolutely loved the play, The Tale of the Immortals. And my favorite song in the musical was Duty and Love, the song where Sophie wrestles with her doubts about herself, obligations to the people of Linus, and her own unsaid feelings towards Cormu. And that song has always inspired me. You may not know this about me, but during my journey, I had the idea to put on a production much like this one. But I have to say in the end, I'm very thankful that I had Charlotte take on that task. I don't think anyone could have done it better."
She waved and smiled and mouthed, "Thank you," to Charlotte off to the side of the stage, who seemed very moved.
But one part of that hope of mine was a song I had started trying to write. A song about my journey, my heart, and my duty. Much like Duty and Love, it is a song in 4 parts. Thank you again, Charlotte, for letting me borrow some of your singers."
At that, 3 figures in dark robes emerged from the curtain and bowed slightly to the crowd. Medea smiled proudly knowingly, and bowed too.
"Please, listen to how I felt. Please listen to my song. It shouldn't be me."
You could hear a pin drop next door. Everyone waited with bated breath. This could be literally the only time this song was ever sung, and everyone knew it. Soft music began to play. The tune was new, but the feeling, the echo of it hammered in Chesney's head. This feeling. His heart beat harder. He could never ever forget that moment in the minstrel's tent when she had sang duty and love, and their eyes had connected, and those feelings that had been building their whole journey were locked permanently into his heart. It had been so long since Medea even mentioned the song she was writing that she sang to him that night on the ship. He had almost forgotten it. He was certain that she had, though it had been so sweet and thoughtful and heartfelt. Would it be the same? Had she been working on it all this time? He, like everyone else, was paralyzed by the weight of this moment. Her song began bright and hopeful, but the choice of each word was so deliberate as to imply that there was something missing, something wrong. At once, her song was about all the things she had, all the things she wanted, and how she felt unworthy of all of them. How she ran away from those feelings by hardening her heart and accepting her place. And as she sang, the more of herself she denied, the more the music seemed to flare and boil, and the more the whispers of the other singers, her inner self, became louder. Two would say her true feelings louder and louder, and then the music would swerve as she turned away. The third stayed silent. And then he came into the song, thematically. She sang how she would follow him, to escape her self-made cage, to find herself at last. A new instrument joined. It was subtle, but filled a space in the music that nobody realized was empty until it was there. The third singer moved at last and whispered too. Once again, she sang bright and hopeful, but the word choices again betrayed what lied underneath. The hopes she had for a new beginning were slowly broken down by more duties and pressures. She shouldered every greater burden with a greater smile, but always her inner feelings sang truth, how she yearned to be free, to understand her origins, and find a place where she truly felt whole. They played with her limbs, pulled her like a puppet here and there across the stage as she sang, even as she denied them. And then subtly, the tone of the song changed too, and her words were now denying that she felt those things she wanted in him. How watching him made her feel weak and unworthy and lost, and yet her true thoughts sang the opposite. When at last her denials grew so hot that she screamed and the music stopped, one by one her inner thoughts gathered close, spoke to her, and revealed themselves. While it was not a shock to the audience, it was a shock to Medea and Chesney. The singer of self was Hamuan, the singer of duty was Carice, and the singer of love was Wild. The three who had sang with her on that amazing night 10 years ago. They seemed to delight at Medea's genuine surprise, and took up the speaking part of the song to give her time to compose herself. The inner thought spoke, that it was okay to choose what burdens to bear, that it was okay to just be who she wanted, and that it was okay to admit to herself she loved him, and to feel whole, even when so much was at stake. Medea's genuine shock melted to deep emotion, and though her voice almost hitched as she took a breath, she exploded in joyful song, along with all three of them, as the climax of the music crashed back in, and all four voices sang as one again. And then, right on cue, their eyes caught once more, just like it had all those years ago, and it was like a switch had been flipped that could never be turned off. For just that single instant he could feel that same feeling of connection to everything. The song was beautiful and heartfelt and vulnerable, and it felt like the whole audience was gone and the song was for him and him alone. But most of all, it was sincere. His heart swelled and absolutely ached at once as he listened to her song, as he watched old friends reunited, as he watched a singular dream of his love come true at last. He could not stop his smile nor his tears. Medea too was struggling, but she held it in. As one, they sang of her true heart, of how she no longer needed to feel unworthy, how she could accept herself for what she was, and how she no longer needed to deny how he made her feel. The final notes died down, and immediately the crowd erupted in applause and stood. If there was a dry eye in the house, he couldn't see it. As they cheered, Medea hugged her longtime friends and allowed herself to break down. And with that, Chesney could wait no longer. He pushed his way out of the aisle, past the crowd. He didn't care who saw this moment. Right then he needed to be at her side. He ran up the stage, and their eyes locked, and they ran together, and he twirled and kissed her, heedless to the crowd watching them. Then again they turned together and hugged Himoan, Carice, and Wild. Charlotte appeared. Over the crowd's thunderous applause, she asked Medea, tears in her own eyes.
So, did you like my surprise?
And then Medea tackled her and hugged her tight and nodded. With a glance between her and the others on stage, Charlotte turned to the crowd and said with emotion,
"Ladies and gentlemen, I once again give you Medea,"
and bowed to her. Himoan, Carice, and Wild also gestured to Medea and bowed, and Chesney mirrored the gesture. That night they all stayed up late and visited with their old friends and Charlotte at the after-party. Apparently, Charlotte had approached the trio just as production really ramped up, and her ideas for getting Medea to sing, and if they would join her song. All three readily agreed, and Wild took a small vacation to join Carice and Himoan to practice, while Charlotte set about convincing Medea to perform.
"Oh my gosh, my fiancé is going to kill me that I didn't get him tickets to this,"
Wild said, laughing and showing off her engagement ring.
"Whoa, I didn't know. When did that happen?"
Medea gushed, looking the ring over.
"Just last month. Took the bastard long enough to propose."
She giggled. It didn't surprise him that Wild was getting married. She was probably the most vibrantly alive woman he'd ever met, and that was saying something.
"But geez, I think I would have skipped my own wedding reception to do this. Your face when you saw us? I thought you were going to burst into tears right there." "I almost did."
Medea smiled and choked at the same time.
"Don't surprise me like that again."
She chided to Charlotte, playfully slapping her arm, but then giving her an appreciative hug in the next moment.
"I'm getting mixed messages here,"
Charlotte joked. She then turned to him.
"So, my friend, how did you like the performance?" "I think it's going to be a week before I can look into my wife's eyes and not need to kiss her right then and there,"
he replied honestly. It really was going to be a struggle.
"Ha! I should be a matchmaker on the side. And the musical?"
He smirked and raised his eyebrows.
"You have quite the fun imagination. I hope it's a smash hit."
Seeing his approval seemed to legitimately relieve her, and she ordered another round for them all, as they continued to catch up.
"I assume you all got to watch it?"
Chesney asked the singing trio.
"What did you think of it?"
Himoan nodded.
"That was a lot bloodier than I was expecting." "Yes, I wanted all the scenes to be a bit flashier than the usual stage props, though we will perhaps need to spare a bit. That little slip-up in the middle there could have been dangerous,"
Charlotte said thoughtfully.
"I thought the story was so sweet,"
Carice added.
"The way you offered to stop the fight between Wild and Medea by loving them both. You had so much love to give."
They all snorted at that.
"Sweet mercy, that hit me out of left field."
Wild laughed.
"There I was just enjoying the absolute wackiest thing I'd ever seen, and then this, like, love triangle plot came out of nowhere. Where did you even get the idea to do that?" "I, may have been a little jealous of you at the time,"
Medea said, the admission making her blush and awkward.
"No. Way. Oh my gosh, are you kidding?"
Wild laughed again.
"Man, if I could go back in time, I'd be like, kiddo, I'm 17, your boy is 13, wasn't happening. Heck, I felt like a terrified babysitter at the time."
The evening went on like that for hours. Wild talked about her fiancé, the two girls from the minstrel tent talked about the new careers they'd since taken up. Once the alcohol really started flowing, things got a little embarrassing, with questions about the future, children, and even a little drunken singing. After a very long celebration, the night grew long, and it was time they all parted. And the pair of them found themselves sitting in the cool chairs of the ship, just letting the night air of the open canopy wash over them and sober them up.
"You were absolutely incredible out there,"
he said after many quiet minutes. She took his hand.
Thanks. I put so much of myself in it, I have no idea when I'll ever do it again. But I really did love being up there.
It came to her.
Speaking of that, do you remember that band that was playing in Zagos' temple when we fought Lokiarn?
He had to fight a little to remember. The actual hopeless fight against the being had lodged firmly in his memory, but the events around it were hazian.
I think so. They had weird instruments that ran on electricity, right?
She nodded.
Yeah. Apparently they were called Wildfire. Anyway, a little while back, I actually ran into the lead singer during one of my diplomatic liaison trips.
How would he have reacted seeing them? Cold, probably. How does one react to meeting the people who sang an accompaniment to your own execution? He wasn't sure where she was going with this, so he tried to stay neutral.
Oh wow. How did that go? When we saw each other, she practically fell on her own sword in front of me, figuratively speaking. It took almost a minute of me trying to calm her down before she would say anything other than apologizing. I guess that had been one of their first big jobs, and they had no idea what they were getting into. They bought into all the propaganda and jumped at the chance to play for him. Little did they know what they were going to end up doing that day. It almost destroyed them. They only recently actually got back together to try to make another go of being musicians.
After hearing that, he was glad the woman had ran into Medea and not him. He'd gotten perhaps a little too used to treating people coldly, to keep that distance. This story only served to further emphasize how incomplete he was without her there.
That was a good thing you did. Why did you bring it up?
She shrugged.
I dunno.
He could tell that was a lie, so he just looked at her until she spilled the beans.
Okay, fine. Seeing her go back to a dream she had put down, it made me think of all the things I still haven't done that I wanted. She actually offered to let me sing with them sometimes on tour, for special occasions. I listened to them play. Their sound is so unique. It's very shouty and fun, totally different than what kinds of singing I was used to, and it seemed very exciting. And what did you say?
She shrugged.
I said I'd think about it.
She wasn't looking at him, instead playing idly with the edge of her armrest. He laughed at how much she was making him drag it all out of her.
Okay, and what did you think? Like, isn't it a little selfish of me? I have so much going on. I have this job as the liaison trying to keep relations between the continents. Rag of stuff. Our public lives we've been trying to get away from and make far less public. I started with that. Isn't that sending a bit of mixed messages? And that would affect you too.
He considered. There was nothing in this world she could ask of him that he would not give to her. They had worked for the last 2 years to become somewhat less public figures, since they both agreed it was probably time, but also that was never going to completely go away. And there was a good reason for why they had been trying to take their lives out of the public eye. But this was starting to edge into the one unfortunate topic he had to bring up.
You know I'll support any decision you have. We're basically the most mobile people on the planet. If things get too crazy, we can literally pack up and move somewhere nobody can find us.
And it was true. He didn't want them to become afraid to be who they wanted to be, even if they had to work a little extra hard to keep that balance. She smiled.
Thank you, Chesney. I don't know what I want to do, but I will think about it.
But then she looked a little apprehensive.
There was one other thing I wanted to talk about. Seeing her pick her dream back up, seeing all our friends moving on with their lives. It's really made me think about things, and I was kinda wondering.
She blushed and hid her face, which he always found so adorable.
You know, like, trying.
Oh, wow. Her implication figuratively blew a fuse in his mind. He had suspected this conversation was coming, but suspecting it and actually having her bring it up were two entirely different things. The course of the whole evening took a swerve in his mind. Things he wanted to say, things he needed to say, and the truly unfortunate news he had to share. It was something he dearly wished for. something they talked about waiting for the right time, preparing, and especially now that he was a teacher, that feeling of watching young lives learn and grow really awakened a paternal instinct in him. But his heart ached because she had brought it up before his less than stellar news, and he didn't know now how to break it to her. She took his stunned silence for apprehension about her suggestion.
I know it's a weird time to bring it up. It's just, all my friends I grew up with, they're already starting families, you know. And I know we have all the time in the world, but I don't want to wait. I don't want to be like, always waiting for the perfect time, and then suddenly it's been another 10 years, you know.
Her eyes were so vulnerable. He needed to be so delicate here. Taking her hands in his, he spoke to her with a soft, loving voice.
Medea, I'm sorry for my reaction. You just caught me off guard there for a second. You know how much I'm on board with that idea, don't you? I want nothing more in this world than to start a family with you. I can't wait to see what kinds of parents we'll be. That's why we've been trying to get our private lives back, so we could raise our children how we always wanted without everyone gawking at us.
She bit her lip.
I feel like there's a but coming.
Damn it. He truly hated that he had to ruin this moment between them with something like this. It wasn't fair. At all. To either of them. To quote his amazing wife, they had served their sentence. They didn't owe anything to anyone else. But, in this instance, maybe they didn't have a choice. He sighed.
Yeah, there is. I'm sorry. That's part of why I wanted us to talk on the ship.
Her eyes looked a little hurt, and it broke his heart that he had done that. He hated feeling like he was forced into this.
Here,
he said at last, standing and leading his wife to the controls.
I need to show you something first.
He pressed a few buttons, and the canopy closed, and the craft began to rise and rise into the air. They continued to fly up until the haze of the sky was gone, and all around them was the inky blackness of the stars around them. Raiga was shining gibbous, and just off to the side was a small pale dot that was Raiga's other moon, Eltz.
A few weeks ago, PS started getting some strange readings from Eltz.
He typed up a few new commands, and the display zoomed in on the pale dot, bringing the slightly greenish world into larger view.
Eltz?
She asked, confused.
I thought there hasn't been any emissions from it for millennia. There hasn't until now, which was why Piaz was concerned. Well, even so, we knew there was another small team sent there. Why is he concerned? Piaz wasn't able to explain everything to me, but there are some readings he's been getting, and they're concerning because they're getting stronger. Gravitational waves. Right now, they're negligible. They wouldn't even make a fruit in orbit change its path. But he's worried that if they continue to get stronger at the rate they are, years, maybe even months from now, they could crash both moons right into Raiga.
She gasped.
Does he have any idea what's causing it?
He shook his head.
No, but we can't ignore it. Someone has to investigate, and my instincts are telling me it's going to be another fight, which means we might need to postpone our family plans.
Her features hardened and cracked all at once.
That's not fair. Haven't we done enough?
He closed his eyes, hating it just as much as her.
I know. It is. And we have more than enough. If it was anything else, I would tell them to fuck off and figure it out themselves. But this is our world. Our only home. If their worst fears come true, we won't have anywhere to go. So, I'm asking you, can we put it off until we investigate?
Her breath came out in a shaking sigh.
And what about the next problem, and the next? When does our happiness matter?
He wrapped his arms around her and held her. There was no easy fix for this moment. When they parted again, her features were dark.
All right. We go out and investigate. We settle everything all at once. Even if there's a next thing and a next. And then I'm done. Do you hear me? We're done. I refuse to settle another Raigan problem after this. Do you understand?
He nodded.
I do. And I'm looking forward to telling Piaz that with you when we meet up with him next.
At last, she sat down in a huff.
Well, that sure put a damper on the evening. I picked out this dress and everything, just for tonight.
There was one possible way to salvage the evening.
Well, I had one other bit of news, one you might find really interesting. Is it good news? It's not good or bad, it's just interesting.
She gave him a curious look. He smiled and gestured to come up and join him again. He typed up a few more commands as he talked.
As you know, I've been working with PS to try to get a better understanding of their technology and the language, yada yada yada. As such, I've been fiddling around with the ship, trying to understand it a little better.
Once he finished the last command, the view screen changed to black and white snow.
Before I show this to you, I have a question for you,
he asked, his grin widening.
Obviously, you know how we went back in time to cause our own future, right?
She nodded along.
Yeah, of course. Though, how in the world that actually works, I've never fully understood.
He nodded enthusiastically.
Yes, exactly. That question has been driving me crazy for years. How did the time loop form in the first place? I've been poring over records in my spare time, and I was getting just nowhere, until I thought to myself, what would have happened if we never went back in time? Well,
she said, humoring his line of thought,
Lennis would be destroyed, right?
He nodded.
Yes, but wouldn't we have still fallen to Lennis 10,000 years later? I guess so. Ugh, that's an awful idea. Two babies falling onto a dead world?
Chesney nodded.
Right. And so I thought about it and thought about it. What would have happened to us in that timeline? Well, I started searching the absolute oldest, most corrupted records then. And after a bit of fixing up, I found this. Watch.
He pressed a button. The static snow shifted, started moving, and soon a picture began to form. When the video resolved, it showed two people sitting down and facing the camera. Them. But it wasn't them. If Chesney had to guess, the people on the video were only a few years younger than they were now. They looked different too. Had a different sort of air to them, wore different clothes. They even had some kind of face paint on their cheeks under their eyes. Chesney's counterpart was wearing a black uniform, with a tan patterned vest over top, had beaded earrings under both his ears, and a straw-pointed purple pattern painted in his face. He felt old, authoritative, and held himself in a manner that made Chesney believe he was a leader. Mia's counterpart seemed very cool and standoffish, and perhaps a little arrogant, though obviously she was comfortable being around her version of Chesney based on how closely they stood together. It seemed likely they were also in a relationship. She wore earrings with some symbol on them, and a curtain of beads hanging down on both ears. Her hair was partially dyed black, with her usual purple hair color instead used as a highlight. She was wearing a tightly folded silk robe that reminded him of the SS squat fashion Zagos had worn, only this one was pale green and patterned like waves, and had red trim, and over it all was a stunningly vivid yellow open-style robe. And the paint upon her cheeks was like a stylized purple leaf.
What am I looking at here?
Medea said, her voice quiet with wonder and curiosity.
Just watch.
Once the picture had resolved, the audio cut in, and the other Chesney began to speak.
Hi there,
he began. His accent was atrocious. It sounded like a very ancient and degraded version of Lanusian.
We're about to try something that's probably very dangerous, and don't know what's going to happen. So we wanted there to be a record. Something to say. We were here.
The other Medea closed her eyes and smirked.
You're getting ahead of yourself again, love. Perhaps we should start at the beginning.
Her voice was perhaps a little lower than the present Medea's. He couldn't tell why.
Right. Sorry. All right, well, I guess I should introduce us. My name is Lagan, and this is my partner, Mia. We represent the union of the last two resistance forces left on Lennis after the Reagan menace attacked our world and took control.
Remia sighed.
You oaf, you're still not starting at the beginning. I'll start.
She cleared her throat and coolly looked at the camera.
Over 10,000 years ago, beings from the great moon descended upon our world. They called themselves Rygans and called us friends. But it was all a lie. They only came here to destroy us and take our world from us. And they succeeded. Our world became theirs, and the few people left after the destruction were made into their slaves, in all but name.
Lagoon nodded and crossed his arms as he talked.
These monsters were immortal, and very powerful. And they were led by a man who called himself Gabnid. Even the other Regans were afraid of him. Gabnid and his 4 sadistic commanders, his own children, and their unstoppable monster, Strabo, ruled the planet for all those long years, with an iron fist. When we were born,
Rumia began, taking over for her partner.
The world was a stagnant place, barely hanging on to life. All of our resources had been drained by the Rygan people. Our people were barely holding on to life as their slave. All that remained were 2 very secretive factions that did what they could to resist the Rygan menace. One in Nasquat and one in Sasquat. Lagoon was the prodigy of fire, an agent of the Nasquat resistance. I was raised in Sasquat, and hailed as the prodigy of earth as an agent of Sasquat's. When certain information was discovered that revealed a potential weakness of these immortal beings, the 2 factions joined together with a desperate plan. It was discovered that Gabnid's commanders, his children, were each guarding weapons that could actually cut through their impenetrable defenses.
He pulled out a sword. It was not Cormu's sword, but had that special quality to it. Rumia revealed a trident, with similar blades at the tips.
A small group of assassins would be dispatched to infiltrate their fortresses and take the weapons. Me, Rumia, and our 2 bodyguards.
They put the weapons away. Rumia took Lagan's hand, a surprisingly vulnerable expression on her face.
It would take too long to explain everything that happened. The mission took many horrible turns. Gabnid's children were all as devoted to him as they were sadistic monsters. Especially his eldest daughter, Sophicia. We fought them all many times, and eventually claimed their weapons, slain the great destroyer, Strabo. We even learned that we were in fact also somehow Gabnid's children, creations of him, falling to Lennis from the very skies. And then at last, faced off against Gabnid himself. We found that Gabnid was barely a shell of his former self. Sophicia had been controlling the empire in his name. With her gone, it all fell apart.
The 2 shared a silent moment, remembering some shared dark moment. Then the Lagan continued.
It took a long time, but the remaining Rygans and Lanusians found an uneasy peace, with us in the middle, keeping the peace alive. I think it will take a long time for those wounds to heal, and maybe even longer for the world.
He cleared his throat.
Which brings us to now.
Rumia looked a little pained, but then hid it by biting her lip.
While we were investigating some ruins we found in his palace, we discovered something the other Rygans called a time door. Once we finally understood what it meant, there was a lot of discussion on what to do with it. At the end, Lagan and I announced we would go back in time and try to prevent this future from ever happening.
Lagan held her by the shoulder and looked at her with deep love and a wan smile.
Yeah, we wondered what kind of world would be allowed to grow if Lennis had never been devastated. Didn't we owe that to all the millions and millions of people who had suffered, to give them a free and beautiful world?
Rumia swallowed.
Only if we do this. We're not sure what happens to us. The Rygans told us very many dire warnings. Will we disappear? If we find a way to return to our time, which time will we return to? Our own destroyed future? Or the new one we will create? I don't want to fade away. But I think if there's a chance we can save this world, we have to try. I want the world I raise my children in to be one filled with hope. And so we decided to leave this record. Hope that some part of it survives us, no matter what ends up happening.
Lagoon finished quietly. They pressed their foreheads together and stayed silent for a moment. Rumia's voice returned and she looked pleadingly at the camera, her hands joined together.
So this message goes out to the future. Is your world whole? Is it beautiful? Do people smile there? Is there clean food and water? Does it taste good? Do people have fun and love and live together in peace? I really hope you do. Even if we never get to see it. My message to the future.
Lagun seemed to ask quietly. Then he looked at the camera, right into their eyes.
Remember us.
Then he reached forward beyond the camera and the video stopped. Watching that video when he had first discovered it, he didn't know what to think. His mind swelled with possibilities. His heart also went out to them. These two lovers faced with a very difficult choice. They chose possibly their own self-annihilation just to give the world a chance at a future. Could he have done it? But even more than that, how had that recording gotten here? What was their ultimate fate? Medea interrupted him with her thoughts. The corners of her eyes were glistening. He didn't blame her. When he had first watched it, he definitely needed a minute.
Chesney, that's... I don't even have words. My heart broke just listening to her. She sounded so... I don't know, hopeful, but such a wounded kind of hopeful that it just tears at my heart. What even is this?
He let out a breath and tried to organize his thoughts.
I think that's us. The first time. The very first go-around. I think that bleak world was the original past. The original past? Maybe I can grasp this a little better because of my experience with spirit. When I still had the power, I could actually see the timeline. It was pulled around, kinked in a way it was never meant to be, but it was stable. I'd never considered what it would have looked like before that. But a loop like that, it can't come from out of nowhere. That I know for sure. Which made me wonder just how it had started in the first place.
He pressed a few buttons and the display changed to something he could draw on. He drew a line.
Like, imagine this is the timeline right now. The Reagans arrive here. Then the destruction happens. And we show up. Bunch of time passes. We fall to Lennis, yada yada, go back in time.
He drew a line over the other line connecting to when they showed up in the past.
So this is how it looks now.
Then he erased that.
Okay, but what if we never actually did come back? According to that video, Gabnid took over the planet, and it sounds like he forced the colonization to begin. Tons of time passes by, we land on Lennis, defeat him, and come up with the idea to go back in time.
He drew another loop.
Now we go back, defeat Gabnid. Then what happens?
Medea pursed her lips.
Well, I guess Lennis proceeds like we remember. But then what? Did they go back to their time?
He shrugged.
Well, maybe. I can only assume Delgran wasn't destroyed. They did what they came to do, and that was it. They would have had no clue that it could still cause problems. Did they stay? Go? I think they must have left, probably on Cormu and Sophie's time ship. So now, to the people of that time, people from the future came to stop Gabnid, and they have no idea what might stop that from happening, so they don't touch a thing. But they make a time door just in case. And from then on, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
She looked thoughtful for a few moments.
Have you shown this to Piath?
He shook his head.
No. I don't know why. It just kind of felt like a message intended for us in a way.
Her face softened.
Yeah, it really did.
She went back and played the message over again.
Can you imagine it, though?
She said, pausing the video on a clear frame looking at the other cells.
What kind of world they fell to. Their journey sounded so much more dangerous than ours.
He spent nights thinking about just that.
Yeah. They whirled limping along for thousands of years under the control of an immortal tyrant, treating the people like slaves. Sounds like what could have come around if we didn't stop Zagos. Yeah. I never even considered how lush our world is in comparison. I guess I took that for granted. Did you catch that bit about our bodyguards? Isn't that wild? I did. That sounds interesting. I wonder why we had bodyguards. I wish I knew more about their world. What really gets me, though, is those commanders Gabnid had. Do you think he made more experiments?
He asked, having pondered what they were like.
That's a good question. If I had to guess, they were his creations. Why else would they be so unfailingly loyal? I have a hard time believing he'd make weapons like that for them, unless he had total control over them. It's possible they had mothers, though. But, think about what they would have had to fight against. Basically their own siblings, with who knows how much power and experience.
Media looked thoughtful for a while.
That makes me think about some of the worries I used to have. What kind of person I would have been if Zagos had taken me as a baby. Would I have loved him like a father? Would I have fought for his empire? I wonder how his commanders really felt.
Sophicia especially, though he noticed she hadn't brought her yupa. Then she changed the subject.
It also sounds like somehow we were really separated. We were both raised by resistance groups, and then met much older. I wonder what we thought of each other.
There was a thought. When he'd first seen Medea, it was like lightning. He felt that instant connection. What if they were older and had gone through harder lives?
You know, when I look at them, I feel like they had a harder time finding their feelings for each other.
Medea nodded.
Yeah, I think so too. It's so eerie seeing a completely different version of you, but feeling like you can understand them just from seeing how they act. Remia seemed so aloof, but her guard was always down when she looked at him. I can guess that she was probably very stubborn before that, though.
That made Chesney laugh.
You? Stubborn? Shut it. Oof.
She chided, mirroring her other self.
And I don't know, there was just something about that Lagan.
It was Chesney's turn to nod.
Yeah. When I looked at him, I felt... I was a leader, but he was a leader, you know? He seemed a little intense, even for me.
She came to him and held his arm to her.
I prefer you this way. Sweet. Silly. Thoughtful. Protective. Well, now you're just fishing for reciprocal compliments.
She pinched him.
And what's wrong with that? Oh. Okay. I prefer you too. You're strong, and so determined. The most beautiful woman I've ever seen. Way smarter than me. And really tender. Now that you have me talking like a big sappy idiot, are you happy?
Her blushing cheeks and uncontrollable grin said she did.
Yes. Very happy.
She leaned up and kissed him. It was hot and forceful, and he could feel her complex emotions through her lips pressed against his. Then they broke apart, and she leaned against his chest.
I want them to be remembered. Forever. I hope. I hope they found their happiness. Yeah. Me too. I'll have to get Piaz to salvage as much of it as he can. But,
she said, her grin turning devilish.
That's a tomorrow problem.
He knew where this was going, and he couldn't keep a silly grin off his face.
You know, I can think of another problem to solve. One that needs our immediate attention,
he said, and swept her up into his arms, bridal style. She screamed and giggled in delight. And they set aside all other worries and found joy in their love. The happiest couple on all of Lennis. Future. There were indeed many trials that lay before them. Battles to be fought and joined. A new journey that would take them to Elt to find another like them, and a world-ending threat. And another to their dead homeworld, Rega, to end the eternal slumber of an ancient people, and discover dark secrets buried by time and poison and death. But those are stories for another day. Stories of other heroes. After their many trials, after a trio of worlds are joined at last, they find their true happiness in a growing family. Though their time is limitless, they spend it as if each moment could be their last. Their children mark the firstborn in thousands of years, and sparks a new beginning, for them and everyone. The end. Afterward. Wow. 2 years ago, when I started this project, I never could have imagined how it feels to be here at the finish line. The euphoric pride at having set oneself a goal and working towards it every day. Letting it consume all your idle thoughts and somehow come out the other end with a labor of love. How amazing is it that the course of your life can change just from an idle thought? That's how it started. A simple little challenge I set for myself. That one moment of the game that had always stuck with me as a kid. Chesney unwittingly causing the deaths of everyone at school, and the headmaster blaming him and forcing him out into the world to try to take it all back. I wrote out that small bit of the story one day, just to see how it would look in prose. It just felt like something special. I always hoped someone would write a novelization of the game so I could read it. It wasn't until much, much later in my life that I had the confidence in myself to do it myself, when I saw my hopes were never going to be fulfilled otherwise. I learned a lot doing this. I always had a great amount of respect for anyone who can start a project and get it out the door, but now I have a much greater understanding of the unique challenges authors face. Even if I did write this novel essentially on training wheels, knowing the overall plot structure but getting to paint in the details and breathe life into it, there was so much to consider and keep track. You wouldn't believe the amount of supplemental material I wrote out or imagined that didn't fully make it into the story. For example, way in the beginning of the story when Chesney catches Medea singing a song about Cormu, I wrote out a whole song like it was a Broadway musical. In preparation for the glimpse into the tale, first journey we only get hints at in the video above, I wrote out summaries, whole character arcs in my head that now lay on the cutting room floor, to say nothing of the dozens of attempts at key dialogues. I want to thank some people. Rabbit, from Rabbit Plays, yours was the Let's Play I watched to remind myself of the general flow of the game. I spent many lunch hours listening to you play and typing away notes. Thank you. The classic Paladin's Quest LP from Staten, probably the one place on the internet with fan art of Paladin's Quest, and there's a ton. Incredibly horny, of course, but man, what an icon. I also referred to this for dialogue screenshots when I couldn't be bothered to laboriously type out the original dialogue in my notes. RPG Shrine for Paladin's Quest, thanks for all the detailed information for the game and characters. Incredibly helpful. It helped immensely for some of the subtle details. Knowing what kinds of enemies showed up in certain areas helped so much with theming. Jason B. Ed. Thank you, friend, for translating what Natrek was in the original source material, as well as the AHSD. I know you were often busy with your own projects, but it was a load off my mind to be able to write confidently about these things. The Averless Guide to Paladin's Quest on Game Effects. No other guide is nearly as detailed. When I really needed to know even the smallest bit of information, it was always assured to be here. Thank you for your hard work and awesome formatting. And most importantly of all, thank you, Lexis. I cannot say if I would have gotten through all of this without your engagement and encouragement. I know it must not have been easy to comment as much and as often as you did, but I always looked forward to your thoughts. I am so thankful for all you did for me. I do not have the words to express the depth of my gratitude for your unwavering support. So, what's next for me? That's another big question. While writing this novel, I had ideas for a half-dozen others, to say nothing of all the half-finished novels abandoned before I even started this, like any writer. Will I write Lenissa 2? Probably not. While the first part of the game could be made heavy with interesting world-building and drama, it fails in the same ways as Paladin's Quest. All the really juicy stuff happens at the end, and you're left wandering aimlessly even more disjointedly than its predecessor. While I'm sure I could make something workable, I know I wouldn't look forward to writing it like I did this novel. Not that anyone needs my permission to make fanfiction of this fanfiction. They certainly have it if they wish to continue on this story in their own words. Will I write Lenissa, Paladin's Quest, the first? Maybe. Probably not now. But certainly maybe. I honestly might just write it as an actual publishable novel, though, and not attached to fanfiction. I haven't decided. I have a lot of novel ideas, and I think I want my next novel to actually be something I can publish. If I do, I'll for sure mention it here. What I probably will do, though, is write much smaller things on here from time to time. I had so much fun with The Ties That Bind that there's no way I can stay away from writing more things like that. Well, I suppose that is that. To anyone who reads this, thank you. If you got to the end, please tell me what you thought. I'd love to hear it, no matter how much time has passed. May we meet again. Hexatona.